Jocelyn Bell is our guest today, and she is the editor and publisher of Broadview magazine. Broadview is the fourth name of the oldest continuously published magazine in North America and the second oldest in the English-speaking world. It was most recently known as the United Church Observer. Broadview serves an audience of progressive Christians as well as those who share progressive Christianity's core values. Jocelyn and Broadview have won many awards, but the most recent exciting nod to their mutual excellence is Jocelyn's nomination as an outstanding finalist in the 2020 Canadian Magazine Award, the Editor's Grand Prix. Prior to all this great work, Jocelyn was an editor of Childview magazine, which was published by World Vision, and before that, she was a reporter at the Hamilton Spectator. She has a journalism degree from Ryerson University. Welcome, Jocelyn, and thank you for making this time available.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that lovely intro. You did your research.
Jocelyn, lots of writers want to write books, which is admirable and good, but we'd love for you to talk today about the value and beauty of writing articles.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a book once. It's a very long process. I think, writing a magazine article is a bit like writing maybe a chapter of a book, or maybe it's like boiling your book down to the very best parts of it. I'm a person who likes things to be done. I like to check things off my to-do list and have them done. And so a magazine article it's much like a book exercise. It takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of thought and thinking, but it's all done in a few months, which is really nice for many people.
Another way I was thinking as you were speaking to think of a book is as a series of articles, which can actually, on the other hand, make a book seem less foreboding.
Yes, we've had some writers do it that way too, where they've written a regular column for us or a blog, and then they've turned those articles into a book. So yeah.
What was your book? I did not know you had written.
I did a book. It was on a commission. It was about the history of Five Oaks, which is a United Church education and retreat center. So they asked for, they wanted a history book, so I did that.
Okay, very good. So we'd like to ask you back to articles, which I guess would be your specialty. What makes a good magazine story? Like when do you know you're done editing it?
Well, I guess when the deadline comes up, you just have to let it go at some point. Yes. I think what makes a really great magazine story is, we get a lot of pitches, and when I get a pitch and I say, oh my gosh, I want to read that story. You just get that gut feeling like, wow, I just want to know what this is about. Or sometimes, I think my readers would really want to read this story because I'm not exactly the same as all of our readers. Second, I look for some tension in a piece. Is there an ethical quandary at the core of the story? Is there an obstacle to overcome? Is there some mystery that needs to be solved? These are the things that, that tension, that's what can carry a reader through 3,000 or 4,000 words. And then I also look for what I call multi-layering. So I could say, for example, we had a story in our January issue, which was about a woman who, through a DNA test, found her, she was adopted. And through a DNA test, she found her biological brother, but she also found a whole hornet's nest of family problems that her own birth represented. So first of all, oh my gosh, I want to read that story. And second, plenty of tension. But the story worked because it wasn't just her story. She also looked at the assumptions and mythologies that we carry around adoption. She spoke to a family therapist. She wrote about how she felt that God was leading her in this journey and brought in some of her faith into that. So it was bringing those layers, having multiple layers to a story, weaving those together into a really vibrant narrative. That's what I look for in a story. And I think, when it's hitting all those points, then we've got a great magazine story.
That sounds like that was a first person account, was it, Jocelyn? It was. Okay. So not every writer or every writer who, hopes to write magazine articles has those kinds of dramatic experiences that would make for a great feature story. Yes. What do you look for in a good magazine feature writer?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody has that dramatic a story for sure, and thank goodness, because that's a lot of drama. I love to see people who are so passionate about their subject that I feel like they would research it and just be reading up on it all over the place anyway, even if they didn't have an assignment for me. So I like that kind of excitement and passion when it comes through. I think, a good feature writer needs to have some courage. You're going to have to talk to strangers. You're going to have to ask maybe some difficult questions. You're going to have to put yourself as a writer out there, and your subjects out for, public scrutiny. And just, good old fashioned hard work. You might have to do a lot more research than you thought. You might have to interview more people. You will have to slog through the writing and editing process. And so just kind of that, hard work, get it done kind of mentality, I think is important.
Actually, Jocelyn, can you walk us through, oh, you had a follow-up, Patricia, you go ahead, and then I'll ask mine.
Okay, I was just going to say, so what about the actual writing? What do you look for in the writing of a piece then when, if the writer has, that they've got all of those abilities and then they deliver the story to you, what makes it a great feature story?
Yeah, I like, trying to really work with the writer on getting very clear writing, almost to the point where you don't even feel like you're reading something. It's just that transparent feeling that it's just, just comes off the page so simply. So I like simplicity and clarity and tightness. But, I'm looking to see that they have, brought in all the layers that I think should be there, that, that they have a strong thesis to their piece, that they've got some nice scenes, that it's not all experts, it's not all numbers, but it's also not all just scenes. There has to be that nice balance between information and anecdote and expert quotes and things like that. So I don't know, it's hard to say. Every time I feel like it's a little bit different.
I was going to ask about the process, which I think follows up on that. So, and I was thinking about editing and how many times a piece can be edited. Like, I think Patricia and I are, pretty experienced writers, but we can still have the experience of going back and forth, of course, multiple times with an editor on a magazine piece. And you mentioned the pitch. So can you walk us through, that email pitch to the finished product, what the events are for writers who may not know?
For Broadview in particular.
Yeah.
So after we receive a pitch, we usually we consider all of our pitches at an editorial meeting once a week. So we consider them as a group, because I think as a group we make better decisions than individuals with their own biases. And so if as a group we want to go forward, then we tell the writer and we give that person a word count and a deadline to work towards. And some other feedback if we've discussed in the meeting, well, what about this and what about that? So we might also offer some other ideas for their piece. And then once they've got the first draft, then they work with a handling editor through maybe 2, 3, 4 drafts, going back and forth. I think usually the first draft back might be there might be some big structural things, or maybe you need to go back and interview some more, like some of the bigger stuff. And then it winnows down through the different drafts to now we're down to, the fine-tuned copy edit and tightening up your sentences and things. And then we have a fact-checking process for our features. So we require a fact-checking package from the writer where they can itemize every fact that's in their piece and show us a link to a website or to a quote in their, they have a transcription of their interview, for example. So they'd have to show where all of those facts came from. And then once everybody's satisfied between the handling editor and the writer, it goes to another editor for fresh eyes, and then into layouts.
That's quite the process.
Yeah.
So, Jocelyn, what are some of the common pitfalls that you find in beginning writers who, are new to this process?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest pitfall for beginning writers and for seasoned writers is forgetting to include the theme paragraph. Some people call it the nut graph or maybe the thesis. But, in a typical magazine story, you're going to have an opening scene that tells you something about what the story is and draws the reader in. But after maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, you're going to have that one paragraph that says, this is what the story is about. This is why it's relevant to the people who read this magazine in particular. And this is a kind of where the rest of the story is going to go. So it's just, here's why I want you to keep going. And it's all in one paragraph or maybe two. And a lot of people skip that. They get caught up in their opening scene, and then it kind of maneuvers onto some other part of the story, and they don't have that. That paragraph really kind of informs the entire structure of the story. So I think it's really crucial too. I even recommend when writers ask my advice to write that paragraph first. And it could take you a whole morning, a whole day, just to really what is my story about? What is this at the very core? What is the story about? And I think that's the first piece you write before you start, enjoying the colorful writing of your opening scene.
What about with veteran writers? Do you have veteran writers pushing back or making common mistakes too?
Yeah, I mean, I've got veteran writers who also don't include a main paragraph sometimes. I think, sometimes it's helpful to know how veteran writers want to work. Some people really want a lot of hands-on, a lot of let me rewrite your sentence for you. And some of them don't want you to touch the copy. They prefer just to have comments and then they'll work them out. So, but I can't think of, the mistakes are always just the same things where, you've talked about this part of the story in paragraph, 5, but now I see in paragraph 20 that you're kind of coming back to that. Those two things need to come together. All those sorts of structural problems are just, I think, part of the writing process for everybody.
Do you make outlines when you're writing your own feature stories, Jocelyn?
I do. I haven't written a feature story for quite some time because mostly I'm editing and publishing. But even I write a column every month. It's just the editor's column, and it's only about 450 words. And even for that, I will make a structure to help me navigate, because that's a pretty tight space that I'm trying to say something meaningful. So I will make a structure for even, it's probably 5, maybe 6 paragraphs altogether. So I'll make a structure for that. Yeah, always.
Do you miss writing?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Yeah. I do enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing the column. So that's an outlet for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's talk about the role that reading plays in your life. What kinds of things do you like to read? What really kind of is the wind beneath your wings as an editor?
Yeah. Well, I love reading other magazines, long form journalism. When I have time, and back in the days when you could still browse in a bookstore, I love picking up a few magazines. Sometimes that makes me a little anxious too, because I'll be something in another magazine and I'll go, oh shoot, we should have had that story, or why don't we do it this way? So then it feels a little bit like work. But I love a good long form journalism piece. I like to read fiction, before bed. It settles me down, and I really enjoy reading books. I also really enjoy, my son is 8 years old, and so I'm just reveling in reading children's books to him and some of the classics. And so we're reading The Hobbit right now. So that's great. I love that.
That's one of the pluses of having kids, right? You get to reread all the greats.
And some of them for the first time too. That's I think my dad read us The Hobbit, but some of the other ones that are newer that came about after I was a child. There's lots of those. So.
All right. So when you pick up a magazine and you're enjoying long form journalism, can you tell us what magazines you're likely to go to?
Yeah, I mean, I have a subscription to Maclean's, but that's more to just keep informed on Canada. I like Toronto Life. I like The Walrus. I really love Mother Jones. I think they do a great job of doing social justice pieces, but really having a strong storyline and not kind of just being about the issue, but really telling a good story around an issue. So that's one that I always admire. Maisonneuve, and I think those are, Harper's in the Atlantic. Some of the American ones are wonderful too.
Good.
Jocelyn, speaking of issues, Broadview has tackled some tough ones. And I'm wondering what you have learned about writing well about hard things.
Yeah. You know, the recipe to me is kind of 2 parts unflinching truth telling and 1 part grace, and or maybe 2 parts grace, I don't know. I put a lot of faith in our readers to handle gritty subject matter. You know, the world is difficult, they're adults, they're suffering, and so, you know, just kind of being unflinching about those topics. And so far, you know, with a very few rare exceptions, I've been able to trust readers with hard topics. One example that comes to mind is we had a story recently about female genital mutilation. And in that story, we talked about the reconstructive surgery that's available to women and girls. And, you know, we described that using all the medical words that you would think of. And I thought, oh, you know, are people going to think, oh, I can't deal with this? But I didn't hear that from anybody. Every time I've thought, oh, is this too much? You know, people have responded positively. So I feel very lucky to have an audience that, you know, that doesn't shy away from difficult subject matter. And then in terms of the grace that I mentioned, I think, you know, we've had to be very careful when we're talking about people who are victimized and people who victimize those people, the perpetrators. You know, are we casting the people as victims when they don't see themselves that way? Maybe they see themselves as, you know, advocating for their own situation or agents of change. Similarly, do we cast some people as villains? Well, maybe they are people who have some context, some cultural context that we need to better understand that informs the way that they're behaving. So that's, to me, is an act of grace to say, you know, there's not just villains and victims here. There's people and contexts, and they're acting in the way that they think is best sometimes. So, yeah, I think just context is really important.
How do you communicate that to your writers, Jocelyn? Because it's easy as a writer to bring our own preconceived notions about a subject to a piece. And like I'm remembering a few years ago when the whole you know, controversy was swirling surrounding face coverings, and you know, women who chose to wear the niqab, and a lot of what was being written at that time was people saying, you know, these poor women, and yet the women themselves were often standing up for themselves and saying, no, this is how I choose, you know, to dress, to clothe my body. And so how do you, you know, educate your writers to look out for those kind of preconceived notions in themselves when they're tackling a difficult subject?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard for all of us. It's hard for us as editors. I don't always see it, and then another editor on staff will say, you know, this sounds a little bit, you know, we're talking about the people from this very poor neighborhood as though, you know, they live in squalor, and I don't think we need to really describe it that way, even if it might, you know, to our middle class eyes look that way. I don't think that's the way to describe this person's home. Things like that. You know, really the best remedy is to start hiring writers from those communities to write about themselves a bit more. You know, speaking of face coverings and niqab and so on, you know, we published a piece recently by a Muslim woman, and sometimes she wears her hijab and sometimes she doesn't, and why does she choose? She goes back and forth, and talking about that experience. You know, you can't, and I don't think need to always choose a person from that particular situation to write about the situation, but more and more we are making space for people to write about their own communities themselves and trying to seek out those writers more and more.
So what do writers need to know generally about working with editors, Jocelyn, or ideally, what would you like them all to understand?
Yeah. You know, when you watch movies about magazines or about books, things like that, they always seem to have these nice long lunches where they talk about the manuscript, and and it's this whole like very, you know, hands-on approach. I just think we're really busy, and so we're making quick decisions about stories, whether they're in or out. We're editing, often a dozen stories at once. So just that we're, the back and forth is not going to be as hands-on as some writers, I think, would like, and as much as we would like, we just don't have time. But I think, writers should know that editors are also writers, and so get it. We know that when you've put your first draft together, you think it's perfection, and you put your whole heart and soul into it, and then we know that when we send our edit back, that you're like, you're either angry or you're crestfallen, you're cringing, or however your personality is.
Hurt.
And so we know that's like, yeah, you're like, oh, and we know that you're having imposter syndrome all for the next 24 hours. So we get it, and we try to be as constructive and positive as we can, but also to explain what the reasons for the changes are. So I just think get your edit back, give it a skim, then sleep on it. Don't try to address it right then and there. Come back the next day.
How do you like writers to approach you when they have story ideas?
Just an email pitch. Yeah, we have on, if people go to broadview.org and then skim to the very bottom, there's a submission guidelines link. And so I like it when people have read the submission guidelines and send us an email. I also really appreciate when a writer has taken time to look at both the print magazine and the online offering, and can suggest to us which section of the magazine they think their story is suited to, because not every story is a 4,000 word cover story. Some of them are short pieces, and there's lots of departments. So if they say this is for such and such a department, then I know that they have taken the time to look at the magazine and fit their idea to what we're already doing.
Yeah, I think in my work as an editor with Faith Today magazine, I think that is one of the most common mistakes writers make, is not taking the time to look at the magazine. And it's usually fairly obvious. I mean, it's obvious when they have, because they share that and it's just instantly appealing, but it's also pretty obvious when they don't. And then if I'll suggest that, like, maybe you should, maybe go take a look at the magazine and then rework it and come back. And I really think if writers did that, they would save themselves. They would just be so much further ahead.
Yeah. And almost everybody pitches a feature. They just think features. And probably a better way to get into a magazine and get to know the editors is through the shorter front and the book sections. So if you could write a few pieces for those sections and for the website, show yourself to be dependable, good writer, good ideas, and then you've developed that relationship through those shorter pieces. Now you pitch a feature. Now we want to take a chance that's
Exactly. Well, Jocelyn, we're so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and your time today. Where can people find you and Broadview online?
We're at broadview.org.
Okay, there you go. And do you blog or anything on your own as a writer, or your work is at Broadview mostly?
Yeah, it's all at Broadview. Yeah. Because I'm the editor and the publisher, it feels like two jobs most times. So.
Oh boy. Yeah. I'm sure. Well, thank you, Jocelyn, so much for joining us for this great writing and editing conversation. And you can find more of these conversations on our Facebook page or links at craftcostcall.com. So thank you.